There is a kind of fear that makes you run, and there is a kind of fear that makes you stop running on purpose. Most of us will never feel the second one. But somewhere deep inside a flooded cave, at a fork in the rock where one passage led toward open water and the other led down into the unknown, a diver reached a decision that the people who loved him could never fully explain. He had air. He had a working line. He had a way that pointed, however faintly, toward home. And he turned away from it. He chose to stay in the dark. To understand why a sane, trained, experienced human being would do that, you have to understand what waits at the edge of a cave diver's mind. Because the thing that killed him wasn't the water. It was something he saw, or thought he saw, that was worse to him than drowning. Let me be clear about what we're dealing with, because this story lives in a strange place between the physical and the psychological. Cave diving kills people in obvious ways: out of air, lost line, silt out, equipment failure. But it also kills people in a way the sport almost never talks about, a way that doesn't show up cleanly on any report. It kills people through the mind. Deep underwater, in total darkness, under crushing pressure, the human brain can turn on you. And when it does, the most dangerous environment on the planet stops being the cave around you and becomes the one inside your own skull. Our diver was not reckless. That's the first thing everyone who knew him insisted on afterward. He was methodical, calm, the guy other divers wanted on their team because he never lost his head. He'd logged hundreds of cave dives. He knew the rule of thirds, knew his gas, knew his limits, and respected them the way you respect a loaded weapon. On the day everything went wrong, he was exploring a system that pushed past the surveyed, mapped sections into water no one had documented. Virgin Passage. The thing that draws explorers down there in the first place. The chance to be the first human being ever to see a particular few feet of the planet. He'd laid his own line as he went, tying it off, reeling out fresh guideline into the unmapped dark. And he came to a junction. 2 ways forward. To the left, the passage he could feel widening, the current hinting at a connection back toward known water. To the right, a tighter throat of rock dropping away into deeper black, the kind of lead that makes an explorer's heart beat faster. He shone his light down the right-hand passage, and whatever his beam landed on, he stopped dead. Here's where I have to slow down, because this is the heart of it. We know roughly what happened next from his gas data, from the position they eventually found him in, and from the grim science of what deep darkness does to the mind. The condition has a few names. Divers call it the rapture of the deep, when nitrogen at depth makes you drunk and stupid and strangely calm. They call it an isolated diver event, when the brain, starved of any visual input, begins to manufacture its own. In total sensory darkness, the human mind does not sit quietly. It fills the void. It generates light that isn't there, movement that isn't there, presences that aren't there. Sailors alone at sea have reported it. Solo climbers high on oxygen-starved peaks have reported it. And cave divers, suspended in black water far from any surface, have reported the worst version of all, the certainty that they are not alone. So picture him at that fork, light down the right passage, and in that beam, in water no human had ever entered. His exhausted, pressure-loaded, dark-soaked brain shows him something. We will never know exactly what. A shape in the silt, a face, a figure where there could not possibly be one. The horror isn't that something was actually there. Almost certainly nothing was. The horror is that to him, in that moment, it was as real as the rock under his hand. And real fear doesn't care whether its cause is real. Now here's the cruel mechanism that turned a hallucination into a death sentence. The way home was to the left, but to get there, his planned route, his own laid line, ran back past the very junction where the thing appeared. To leave, he would have had to move toward it, or at least past it. And a mind in the grip of that kind of primal terror cannot be reasoned with. It will not walk toward the predator. So he did the thing that the deepest, oldest part of the brain does when cornered. He retreated from the threat. He went the other way, away from his line, away from the route home, into the unknown passage because anything felt safer than going back toward what his eyes were screaming at him. And that single decision, to abandon the line in order to escape something that wasn't there, is, in the cold language of cave diving, almost always fatal. The line is the contract with the surface. Break it, swim away from it into unmapped water with no thread to follow back, and the cave's odds become close to perfect. He swam into the right-hand passage, putting distance between himself and the phantom at the fork, and in doing so he put distance between himself and the only path that led to air. Let me sit with how this feels, because it's almost unbearable. He had everything he needed to live. Gas in his tanks, a clear, simple route home, training that had kept him alive through hundreds of dives, and his own mind took all of it away from him in a few seconds, by showing him a single image so frightening that survival itself became the second priority. The body will override the will to live when it believes there's something worse than dying, and a frightened brain in absolute darkness can decide, instantly and with total conviction, that whatever it just saw qualifies. This is the part that should genuinely change how you think about fear. We like to imagine that in a crisis we'd be rational, that we'd assess the facts and choose the safe path. But the brain doesn't run on facts when it's terrified. It runs on the oldest software we have, the predator detection circuit, the thing that kept our ancestors alive by making them flee first, and ask questions never. That software does not know the difference between a real threat and a vivid hallucination. It only knows the feeling. And the feeling is enough to make a trained survivor abandon the rope that's keeping him alive. The deeper he went into the unmapped passage, the worse his odds became. And the worse his odds became, the more his air dropped, the higher the carbon dioxide climbed in his blood. And rising carbon dioxide is itself a hallucinogen, a fuel for exactly the kind of terror that sent him fleeing in the first place. A feedback loop with no bottom. Fear drives him from the line. Leaving the line costs him air. Losing air poisons his blood. The poison feeds the fear. Round and round, deeper and darker, until somewhere in that virgin passage the loop simply ran out of road. When his team finally pieced together what had happened, the evidence told a story that was almost worse than a straightforward accident. He hadn't run out of air at his turn point. He hadn't been trapped by a collapse. He had, by every physical measure, been entirely capable of swimming home. The cave hadn't cornered him. His mind had, and there's a specific terrible kind of grief in that for the people left behind, because you can't blame the rock for a death the rock didn't cause. So what's the lesson buried in here? The thing that reaches past cave diving into your own life. It's this: your perception is not the same thing as reality, and the gap between them is where the danger lives. Down there, in the most extreme isolation a human can experience, that gap cracks wide open, and a man drowned inside it. But you don't have to be 200 feet underwater for your brain to show you a threat that isn't real and make you run from safety toward harm. Panic distorts. Exhaustion distorts. Isolation distorts. The mind under enough pressure will hand you a convincing lie and dare you to act on it. The cave divers who survive, the ones from every story like this, share one discipline above all others. When the fear spikes, they trust the line, not the feeling. They trust the procedure, the plan, the rope back to the world, over whatever their rattled senses are insisting is true. They have learned, the hard way, that in the dark your eyes are not your friend. The line is. He was, by every account, a brilliant and careful diver. That's what makes this one stay with you. It wasn't carelessness that killed him. It was the simple devastating fact that the human brain was never built for absolute darkness and crushing depth. And when you put it there, it can become the most dangerous thing in the cave. He didn't choose death because he wanted to die. He chose it because, for a few seconds in the worst place on earth, his own mind convinced him that what lay ahead on the path home was more terrifying than the dark. And the dark, at least, he understood. Here's what makes this more than a one-off tragedy, and why divers still trade this story in hushed tones years later. He was not the first, and he will not be the last. There is a documented pattern in the sport, a particular signature of death that investigators have learned to recognize. A diver found far off their planned line, in a passage they had no reason to enter, with air still in their tanks and no mechanical failure on any gauge. No collapse, no entanglement, no equipment fault. Just a good diver, in the wrong place, who swam the wrong way for reasons that died with them. When that pattern appears, the experienced hands nod grimly, because they know what it usually means. It means the cave didn't kill this one. The mind did, and there is no piece of equipment you can buy, no redundant tank or backup light, that protects you from your own brain in the dark. Sensory deprivation is not a gentle thing. Strip a human being of sight, sound, gravity, and the company of others, suspend them in cold black water far from any exit, and the nervous system does not simply wait politely for input. It starts to fabricate. Researchers who study isolation have watched perfectly stable volunteers begin to hallucinate within hours in a quiet, comfortable lab on dry land, and a cave diver gets none of the comfort and all of the dark, with their life hanging on staying calm. The brain interprets the silence as wrong, the blackness as a threat, the stillness as a held breath before something happens. And so it conjures the something. It gives the formless dark a shape, because a shape is easier to fight than an emptiness. The tragedy is that the shape it conjures can be the very thing that drives you away from your only road home. This is why the best cave divers talk about the mind as their primary piece of safety gear. Not the regulator, not the reels, not the redundant gas, the mind. They train it like a muscle. They rehearse staying flat and slow when everything spikes. They build a relationship with the line so deep that, in a crisis, the hand on the rope is more trusted than the eyes behind the mask. Because they know that the moment will come, on some dive, in some passage, when their senses lie to them. And on that day, the only thing standing between them and his fate will be a stubborn, drilled-in refusal to believe their own panic. And it raises an unsettling question that reaches far beyond diving. How much of what we're certain we see is actually there? We like to believe our senses report the world faithfully, that perception is just a window onto reality. But the brain doesn't show you the world. It shows you its best guess about the world, a model it builds and constantly updates. Most of the time, that model is accurate enough to keep us alive. But push the brain hard enough, with darkness, exhaustion, fear, or chemistry, and the model drifts from reality, and you have no internal alarm that tells you it's happening. The hallucinating diver felt exactly as certain of what he saw as you feel right now reading this. That's the truly frightening part. Certainty is not evidence. The feeling of, "this is real," is generated by the same machinery that can be fooled. And the cave, in its absolute darkness, is the place where that machinery fails most completely, which is why the divers who survive learn to distrust their own conviction and trust the line instead. I want to hear from you on this one, because it's the kind of story that splits people down the middle. Do you think you could trust a thin nylon line over your own eyes and ears, if every sense you had was screaming that something was waiting for you in the dark? Tell me honestly in the comments. If this one got under your skin, hit like. It tells me you want more of the stories nobody else is willing to tell. And subscribe before you go, because next time I'm taking you to a place called Sapikeda, where a cave diving exploration turned into a 60-hour nightmare that the survivors still can't talk about without going quiet.